right? Turn to middle of chapter 9. We'll be in 9:30 through 32. They went on from there and passed through Galilee, and Jesus did not want anyone to know it, for he was teaching his disciples, saying to them, the Son of Man is to be betrayed into human hands. They'll kill him. 3 days after being killed, he will rise again. But they didn't understand what he was saying and were afraid to ask him. Right? The disciples aren't being quick on the uptake, but here's the clincher for how badly they're oblivious here. Is what's next? Then they came to Capernaum, and when he was in the house, he asked them, by the way, what were you arguing about on the way? But they were silent. For on the way, they had argued with one another who was the greatest. Right? It's like playing Twister at a funeral. Right? This is complete oblivion to what Jesus is saying. Jesus tells them, things are going to go hard for me. Things are going to be very difficult for me. We're going to Jerusalem, and people are not going to respond well, and I'm going to die there. And while he's saying that, they're saying, I'm better than you. I'm better than you. And they're arguing over who's greatest. This isn't just oblivion. This is almost sacrilege. It's certainly not friendly, right? How's your grade for the disciples going now? Okay, but we can take misunderstanding. If we're in the room with the Roman Christians and we're tracking the disciples, we may be disappointed at their daftness. We may be disappointed that they don't quickly come into this cross and crucifixion thing. But we can. They're theologically challenged. We'll just give them that, and we'll keep hoping that they come through in the clutch for Jesus. And then he does it again in chapter 10. He predicts his demise in the most agonizing detail. And while he's doing that, James and John are concocting a way to get the best seats once he's in glory. You remember this, right? The two brothers kind of scheme, can we please have the good seats in your glory? And Jesus just kind of, you can picture him going like this. Because every time he tells them he's going to die, they go completely the other way, right? So 3 times he predicts his death, and 3 times they utterly don't get it. Things aren't looking as good for the disciples, but maybe they're courageous and dumb, right? Maybe they're the kind of people who aren't that intelligent, but they'll come through for you, the reliable, faithful, courageous folks. But of course, they get to Jerusalem, and when the heat comes on, when Jesus is called, is sort of sought in the garden, it's because one of his disciples has betrayed him, right? Judas has betrayed him, so 1 for 12 has already gone away. Then the narrator is going to say, as the soldiers come, and then all of his disciples forsook him and fled. So it's not just Judas, they're folding like cheap furniture, right? They aren't holding up under the scrutiny, they aren't holding up under the opposition or the danger. Peter comes back and he shows up outside the courtroom at the high priest's house. And you're thinking, ha, Peter, I've always bet on him. I think he's going to come through now, right? And so you're watching closely because you're in that that living room in Rome, and you need some help from these disciples. Peter's your last gasp effort, and he comes up and he's waiting outside, and you're picturing him standing up, and then a little slave girl comes along and says, hey, you were with them, weren't you? And he says, not me. And he does it 3 times. So now, all of Jesus's best guys, his 12 closest, the people who have watched him do everything, have gone away. Under fire, they have just completely malfunctioned. They've run away fearfully. And so whom do we have left? Well, the disciples aren't showing up at the cross, but the women are at the cross, right? The women have come to the cross, and we're thinking, faithful women, maybe they're our hope. Forget about those guys. They're weak, but the women come through. And so they're at the cross. And then the next thing we know, chapter 16, they're showing up at the empty tomb. Let's read that out. 16, 1 through 8. When the Sabbath was over, Mary Magdalene and Mary the mother of James and Salome brought spices so that they might go and anoint him. And very early on the first day of the week, when the sun had risen, they went to the tomb. They had been saying to one another, "Who will roll away the stone for us from the entrance to the tomb?" When they looked up and saw that the stone, which was very large, had already been rolled back. As they entered the tomb, they saw a young man dressed in a white robe sitting on the right side, and they were alarmed. But he said to them, "Don't be alarmed. You're looking for Jesus of Nazareth, who was crucified. He has been raised. He's not here. Look, there's the place they laid him. But go, tell his disciples and Peter that he's going ahead of you to Galilee. There you will see him, just as he told you." So they went out and fled from the tomb, for terror and amazement had seized them, and they said nothing to anyone, for they were afraid. Last word of the gospel. Afraid. So, we're in that Roman living room. We're in that Roman living room. Who are we going to put our money on now? Who are we going to learn from now? We're trying to find somebody who stands up under fire, because we're the new generation. We have inherited the baton, maybe against our wishes, maybe not. Peter's gone. Other leaders are gone. And now it's us. And these disciples are supposed to be our examples. They're no stronger than we are. Right? Maybe some are in their minds crying fraud to this Mark who wrote this gospel, because it looked good for a while, but now the very people we were counting on failed us. Right? And then maybe somebody in the room figures out that Peter didn't stay stupid or cowardly. After all, why do they have to be leaders? Because Peter had stood up to Nero's persecution. He even said, "I can't be crucified like my Lord. I'm not worthy. Crucify me upside down." Peter had stood up, as had very likely many of the leaders. But somebody in the room suddenly says, it's not all lost. We know that they made a comeback. Did they really go to Galilee after all? Did Jesus see them there? Did they actually get baptized with the Holy Spirit like we heard at the water in Jordan? Did they make a comeback? And they must have. And we want something that gave them the strength to recover from this abysmal performance in the gospel. It must have been that they met Jesus. It must have been that they got the Spirit. And then this crowd in Rome, looking for courageous people in the story, realized we need the help of God if we're going to come back like Peter comes back. If we're going to gain courage, if we're going to be the people for Jesus in Rome, if we're going to be the leaders of this church, if we're going to be a new generation of Christians, we better know Jesus. We better get the Spirit, because the Spirit made them strong. They weren't naturally that way. In other words, friends, tracking the disciples for them to be saviors doesn't work for this group. It just doesn't work. These aren't poster children for brilliance, and they aren't poster children for courage. They aren't even poster children for faithfulness. They end up disloyal. What they are poster children for is the fact that God can make anybody good at this. But it's got to be God making them good at this. And frankly, the God they know is the very God we know. The people in the room could say that, and you and I can say that. These These disciples looked like us before they got the power of the Holy Spirit. We need the power of the Holy Spirit. Does that make sense? Mark, our subtle narrator, has woven together an abysmal picture of the performance of the disciples so that we will know that God equips the called, God doesn't call the equipped. Right? Many of you have heard that slogan. God doesn't call the equipped, God equips the called. That is never truer than with Peter, the thrice denier, or with the disciples who forsake him and flee. And these Roman Christians and you and I have access to the same Lord and the same Spirit as they had.